The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry hornets as Brody clutched his clipboard, his heart pounding against his ribs. He never expected the day to end with his secret spilled across the warehouse floor, turning his colleagues into a pack of wolves. It started with a dropped phone during the morning shift at Apex Logistics in Chicago. Brody had been reaching for a fallen scanner when his personal messages lit up the screen for everyone to see. "Dude, you into guys?" laughed Marco, the loudest forklift operator on the floor, loud enough for half the team to hear. By lunch, the whispers had turned into open sneers. Someone had taped a rainbow flag to his locker with the word "freak" scrawled across it in black marker. Brody ripped it down, cheeks burning, and kept working, but the damage was done. He was 28, lean from years of lifting boxes, with sharp green eyes that usually stayed focused on the job. Growing up in a small Texas town had taught him to keep his head down and his heart locked. His father still sent Bible verses every Christmas, and his mother pretended not to notice when Brody never brought a girl home. Moving to Chicago 3 years ago had felt like freedom until today. Now every pallet jack scrape and radio call felt like it carried judgment. He finished his route with mechanical precision, but inside he was unraveling. That evening in the break room, 3 guys cornered him. "So, Thompson, you checking us out while we're sweating?" Marco sneered, blocking the door. Brody tried to laugh it off. "Just trying to get through the shift, man." But the laughter that followed wasn't friendly. They knocked his coffee cup off the table, letting it splash across his boots. Brody cleaned it up without a word, the hot liquid soaking through his socks like a reminder that silence wouldn't save him anymore. Driving home to his tiny studio apartment, he gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles whitened. The city lights blurred through unshed tears. He had built a life here, steady paycheck, small group of coworkers he once called friends, weekend hikes along the lake. Now it all felt poisoned. He thought about calling his sister back in Texas, the only one who suspected the truth, but shame choked the words before he dialed. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying every joke he'd forced himself to laugh at over the years just to blend in. The next morning, the bullying escalated. His time cards were lost, forcing him to stay late unpaid. Pallets were stacked so high in his aisle that he had to climb dangerously to reach them. During the afternoon safety meeting, the supervisor, Mr. Klein, avoided eye contact when Brody raised his hand to report a jammed conveyor. Klein had always been fair before. Now he just mumbled, "Handle it yourself, Thompson." Brody nodded, jaw tight, but inside he felt the ground shifting beneath him. By the end of the week, the isolation was crushing. The few guys who used to share lunch with him suddenly remembered urgent errands. Brody ate alone on a stack of empty crates, scrolling through job listings on his phone, with one hand while the other clutched a lukewarm sandwich. He knew he could quit, but the thought of starting over again, new city, new lies, felt worse than the taunts. That Friday, after another round of locker room slurs that left him shaking, he finally broke. In the dim light of the parking lot, he pulled out his phone and searched Workplace Harassment Union. The first result was the Chicago Warehouse Workers Union hotline. His thumb hovered over the call button for a long minute. Then he pressed it. A calm voice answered on the second ring. "Union support line, this is Elias. How can I help you tonight?" Brody's voice cracked as he spoke his name and described the week in halting sentences. He didn't say the word gay out loud, but he didn't have to. Elias listened without interruption, then said gently, "Brody, you're not alone in this. I'm coming to the warehouse Monday morning. We'll file the paperwork together and get this stopped." For the first time in days, Brody felt something other than fear. It was small, fragile, but it was hope. He hung up, pocketed the phone, and drove home wondering if one phone call could really change the trajectory of his life. Little did he know the man on the other end of the line would soon become far more than a union representative. The weekend passed in a haze of anxiety and half-packed boxes. Brody kept expecting a termination notice, but it never came. Instead, he received a single text from an unknown number, Monday, 8 a.m. Sharp. We've got your back. Elias. He stared at the message until the screen dimmed, then saved the contact. Sunday night, he barely slept, running through every possible scenario. Would the guys laugh him out of the building? Would management side with the bullies? Would he have to stand in front of everyone and say the words he had hidden for 28 years? The questions circled until dawn. When his alarm finally sounded, he showered, shaved, and put on a clean uniform like armor. As he locked his apartment door, he whispered to himself, "Just get through today." He arrived at Apex Logistics 15 minutes early, heart hammering. The parking lot was already filling with familiar trucks. Marco's red pickup sat in its usual spot, chrome gleaming like a warning. Brody took a deep breath and walked through the employee entrance. The moment he stepped onto the floor, the atmosphere shifted. Heads turned. Conversations dropped. He kept his eyes forward and headed for his locker. The rainbow sticker was back, bigger this time. Before he could tear it off, a deep voice behind him said, "Leave it there for now. Evidence." Brody spun around and met the steady brown eyes of a man he had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark vest embroidered with the Union logo, Elias Rivera extended a hand. "Brody Thompson? I'm Elias. Let's go talk to management." The handshake was firm, warm, and strangely grounding. Elias's presence filled the space like a shield. As they walked toward the office together, Brody noticed how the other workers suddenly found reasons to look away. For the first time in a week, the air felt breathable. He didn't know yet that this Monday would mark the beginning of a battle that would test every part of him. His courage, his identity, and eventually his heart. But in that moment, with Elias beside him, Brody felt the first crack in the wall he had built around himself. The fight was just starting, and for once he wasn't facing it alone. The office door closed behind them with a soft click that sounded louder than any taunt on the floor. Mr. Klein sat behind his cluttered desk, tie loosened, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Elias placed a folder on the desk before Klein could speak. "We're filing a formal complaint under Title VII and the Illinois Human Rights Act. Harassment based on sexual orientation, hostile work environment, retaliation. We have witness statements starting today." Klein's eyes flicked to Brody, then back to Elias. "Look, Rivera, this is internal. The guys are just joking around." Elias leaned forward, voice calm but steel-edged. "Jokes don't include sabotaging safety equipment or destroying personal property. We can handle this quietly, or we can involve the National Labor Relations Board. Your choice." Brody stood silently, fists clenched at his sides, watching the power dynamic shift in real time. He had never seen anyone speak to Klein that way. Elias's confidence was magnetic, not arrogant, just certain. When Klein finally agreed to an internal investigation and temporary reassignment of the worst offenders, Brody felt his shoulders drop for the first time in days. As they left the office, Elias turned to him in the hallway. "First round to us. Coffee? My treat. We need to talk strategy." They ended up at a small diner 2 blocks from the warehouse, the kind with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been brewing since 1997. Elias ordered black, no sugar. Brody added cream and watched the swirl disappear. "You didn't have to come yourself," Brody said quietly. Elias shrugged. "I grew up in Queens. Watched my older brother get bashed in high school for holding hands with his boyfriend. I promised myself I'd never stand by again. Plus, you sounded exhausted on the phone." Brody looked down at his mug. "I've been exhausted for years." The conversation flowed easier than Brody expected. Elias shared that he had been out since 19, marched in his first Pride parade at 20, and spent the last decade climbing the union ranks so he could protect people like the brother he couldn't save in time. Brody talked about Texas summers, Sunday services that felt like cages, and the night he packed one suitcase and drove north without telling anyone. By the time their second cups arrived, Brody realized he was smiling. Actually smiling, for the first time in weeks. Back at the warehouse, the afternoon shift brought new tension. Marco and two others had been moved to receiving, but the glares followed Brody everywhere. Someone had scratched "Ferry" into the side of his forklift. Elias stayed until closing, taking photos, interviewing witnesses, and quietly noting every incident. When the last truck pulled out, he walked Brody to his car. "Tomorrow gets better. I promise." Brody wanted to believe him. That night he slept deeper than he had in months, Elias's calm voice echoing in his dreams. Tuesday morning, the union filed the official grievance. Word spread fast. Some workers nodded at Brody in passing, small gestures of solidarity that meant everything. Others crossed their arms and muttered. During break, a quiet older man named Luis pulled Brody aside. "I got a nephew like you. Don't let them win." The words stayed with him through the long hours of sorting and stacking. Elias returned at lunch with more paperwork and a brown bag from the deli. They ate on the loading dock, legs dangling over the edge, watching semis rumble past. "Tell me about your family," Elias said between bites. Brody hesitated, then spoke of the letters his mother still sent asking when he would settle down with a nice girl. Elias listened without pity, only understanding. "My dad still calls me every Sunday to ask if I've met any nice girls too." Some parents catch up at their own speed. The shared laughter felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. By Wednesday, the atmosphere had shifted again. Management posted new anti-harassment guidelines, but the real change came from within the crew. A few guys started eating lunch near Brody again. One even apologized for not speaking up sooner. Yet the hardcore Marco and his circle only grew more sullen. During afternoon inventory, Marco accidentally backed a pallet jack into Brody's stack, sending boxes crashing. Brody jumped clear just in time. Elias, who had been observing from the mezzanine, descended like a storm. Security cameras captured everything. Within an hour, Marco was suspended pending investigation. That evening, Elias drove Brody home after his car wouldn't start. Another coincidence. They sat in Elias's SUV outside Brody's building, engine idling. "You're handling this better than most," Elias said softly. Brody looked at him. Really looked. The streetlight caught the silver flecks in Elias's stubble, the kindness in his eyes. Something warm stirred in Brody's chest, unfamiliar and terrifying. "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm barely holding on." Elias reached over and squeezed his shoulder. "Holding on is strength, Brody. The rest comes later." Thursday brought the first union meeting. 20 workers crammed into the break room after shift. Elias stood at the front, charts and graphs projected on the wall showing how harassment lawsuits cost companies millions. He spoke of solidarity, of how one protected worker protected everyone's rights. Brody sat in the back, anonymous among the crowd. But when Elias's gaze found him and held, the message felt personal. After the meeting, several men approached Brody to shake his hand. "We've got your back," they said. The words wrapped around him like a promise. Friday arrived with rain and a surprise. Elias showed up with 2 tickets to a Cubs game the following weekend. Neutral territory. No warehouse talk. Just 2 guys who like baseball and decent hot dogs. Brody laughed despite himself. "I'm not much of a sports guy." Elias grinned. "Perfect. You can teach me how to pretend I know what's happening." For the first time, Brody felt the possibility of friendship, maybe more, without the shadow of fear. As he clocked out that evening, he realized the bullying hadn't stopped entirely, but it no longer defined his days. Elias had given him back control, one steady step at a time. The weekend stretched ahead, full of cautious hope. Brody cleaned his apartment, bought new sheets, and even called his sister to tell her something was changing. He didn't say the words yet, but she heard the lightness in his voice. Sunday afternoon, he stood at the window watching rain streak the glass and wondered what Monday would bring. Whatever came, he knew Elias would be there. The thought settled something deep inside him. For the first time in years, Brody Thompson wasn't facing the week alone. Monday brought sunshine and a new kind of tension. The suspension of Marco had sent ripples through the crew. Some celebrated quietly. Others grumbled about special treatment. Brody kept his head down and focused on his routes. But every time he passed the receiving dock, he felt eyes on his back. Elias arrived mid-morning with a union steward and a stack of updated safety protocols. They spent 2 hours retraining the entire shift on harassment policies. Brody watched from the sidelines as Elias commanded the room, not with volume but with quiet authority that made even the skeptics listen. After the session, Elias pulled Brody into a quiet corner. "You okay?" Brody nodded, but the truth slipped out. "Feels like I'm walking on eggshells again." Elias's expression softened. "That's normal. But you're not alone anymore. Let's grab lunch off-site today. I know a place with killer tacos." They drove to a small taqueria in Pilsen, colorful murals on every wall. Over carne asada, Elias asked about Brody's dreams beyond the warehouse. Brody surprised himself by answering honestly. "I always wanted to study graphic design. Had a scholarship once, but my dad said it was not real work." Elias listened, then shared his own detour. Law school dreams abandoned after his brother's death, choosing unions instead because someone had to fight the fights that matter. The conversation moved easily from past regrets to favorite movies, from Chicago winters to secret playlists. Brody found himself laughing at Elias's terrible impression of a Cubs announcer. For 2 hours, the warehouse felt a million miles away. When they returned, Elias walked Brody to his forklift. "Call me if anything happens." "Anytime." The simple offer lingered like warmth. Tuesday, the cracks appeared in the opposition. One of Marco's friends, a burly guy named Derek, approached Brody during break. "Look, I don't care who you like. Just do your job." It wasn't friendship, but it was progress. Brody thanked him, and the moment felt like a small victory. Elias texted later, "Heard about Derek. Proud of how you handled it." The words made Brody smile at his phone like a teenager. Wednesday brought the first real test of the new normal. During inventory, a heavy box slipped from the rack above Brody. He jumped back just in time, but the near miss left him shaken. Security footage showed no one near it, yet the timing felt too convenient. Elias arrived within the hour, reviewed the tape, and immediately filed an incident report. "We're escalating to OSHA if necessary," he told management. That afternoon, the entire receiving team received mandatory retraining on proper stacking. The message was clear. The union was watching. After shift, Elias insisted on driving Brody home again. They stopped at a park overlooking the lake, sitting on a bench as the sun dipped low. "You're stronger than you think," Elias said quietly. Brody turned to him. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For someone to say this protection is only because I'm Elias met his gaze steadily. "It's because you're a worker who deserves dignity. The fact that you're gay is just one part of who you are. And for the record, that part doesn't scare me." The air between them thickened. Brody felt his pulse quicken. He wanted to lean in to test the space between them, but fear held him back. Instead, he whispered, "Thank you." Elias simply nodded, but his hand brushed Brody's for a brief second, electric and gone too soon. Thursday, the warehouse gossip shifted. People started asking Elias questions about union benefits, retirement plans, even domestic partner coverage. The atmosphere lightened by degrees. Brody noticed small acts of kindness. A guy offering to spot him on a heavy lift, another sharing a pack of chips. It wasn't universal acceptance, but it was breathing room. That evening, Elias invited Brody to his apartment for dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta and conversation. Brody accepted before his nerves could talk him out of it. Elias lived in a cozy loft in Logan Square, bookshelves lining every wall, pride flags discreetly displayed. They cooked together, bumping elbows in the tiny kitchen, laughing when sauce splattered. Over plates of spaghetti, Elias asked the question Brody had been dreading. "Have you told your family?" Brody set his fork down. "Only my sister knows. My parents, they'd never understand." Elias reached across the table and covered Brody's hand. "When you're ready, you won't be alone. I'll be right here." The touch lingered. Brody didn't pull away. For the first time, the idea of coming out fully didn't feel like jumping off a cliff. It felt like having a hand to hold on the way down. Friday morning brought unexpected news. Management offered a settlement, paid leave for Brody during the investigation, and a formal apology letter. Elias reviewed the papers carefully before nodding. "It's a start, but we're pushing for policy changes across the company." Brody signed with shaking hands. The relief was immense, yet he felt strangely hollow. The fight had become part of his identity. That afternoon, Elias drove him to the lakefront again. They walked along the path, shoulders brushing. "You did it," Elias said softly. "You stood up and the world didn't end." Brody stopped walking and turned to face him. "I couldn't have done it without you." The moment stretched. Wind off the lake ruffled their hair. Elias's eyes searched his. Then, slowly, carefully, Elias cupped Brody's face and kissed him. Gentle, questioning, full of promise. Brody kissed back, years of fear melting under the warmth of acceptance. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "I've wanted to do that since the first coffee," Elias admitted. Brody laughed, light and free. "Took you long enough." The weekend unfolded like a dream. They spent Saturday at the Cubs game, cheering and teasing, hands brushing in the crowd. Sunday they hiked the Indiana dunes, talking about everything and nothing. Brody felt himself opening in ways he never had. Elias's steady presence gave him courage to text his sister the full story. Her reply was immediate. "I'm proud of you. Bring him home sometime." The words healed something deep. Monday morning, Brody returned to work with a new confidence. The settlement had been posted company-wide. A few guys clapped him on the back. Marco was still suspended, but the culture was shifting. Elias met him at the gate, coffee in hand. "Ready for round 2? Brody took the cup, their fingers touching. "With you? Always." The journey was far from over. Family conversations loomed, workplace policies needed enforcement, and society still had plenty of shadows. But for the first time, Brody wasn't walking through it alone. Love, unexpected and fierce, had entered the fight, and together they were stronger than any bully or prejudice could ever be. The weeks that followed the kiss unfolded like pages turning in a book Brody had been afraid to read. At work, the official investigation dragged on, but daily life improved in quiet increments. New anti-harassment posters appeared in every break room. Management scheduled mandatory training sessions that Elias helped design. Brody noticed fewer whispers, more nods of respect. Yet the undercurrent of resentment remained. Derek, once neutral, now avoided eye contact entirely. Small things, tools misplaced, routes reassigned unfairly, kept Brody vigilant. He documented everything, texting Elias photos and timestamps. The union became a constant shield, but it was Elias's personal support that kept Brody grounded. One Thursday evening after a long shift, they met at Elias's loft again. This time the mood was heavier. Brody's sister had forwarded a message from their mother. "Tell your brother we love him, but he needs to think about his soul." The words landed like stones. Elias listened while Brody paced the living room. "I knew it would hurt, but reading it still feels like a punch." Elias pulled him onto the couch, arms wrapping around him. "Families take time. Some never catch up. But you get to choose your family too." They stayed like that for hours, talking until the city lights dimmed. When Brody finally fell asleep against Elias's chest, he dreamed of open roads and hands that never let go. Friday brought a breakthrough at work. The union steward announced a vote on new contract language protecting LGBTQ plus workers explicitly. The meeting was tense. Marco, back from suspension with a warning, sat in the back row glaring. When the vote passed 68-12, the room erupted in cautious applause. Brody stood quietly, tears stinging his eyes. Elias caught his gaze across the crowd and gave a small nod of pride. Later in the parking lot, Elias kissed him again. Longer this time, full of celebration. "This is because of you," he whispered. Brody shook his head. "Because of us." The weekend arrived with a trip to Michigan to meet Elias's parents. The drive was filled with nervous laughter and playlists. Elias's mother hugged Brody immediately. "Any man who puts that smile on my son's face is family." His father grilled steaks and asked about warehouse life like it was the most natural thing in the world. For 2 days Brody felt what unconditional acceptance could look like. On the drive home he turned to Elias. "I want that for us someday." Elias squeezed his hand. "We'll build it." Monday reality returned. A new hire, young and loud, repeated an old slur in the break room. Before Brody could react, 3 older workers shut it down instantly. "Not in this house," one said. The moment was small but seismic. That evening Brody called his sister again. "I think I'm ready to tell Mom and Dad myself." She offered to be on the line. The conversation was painful. Tears, silence, Bible quotes. But it ended with his mother saying, "We'll try to understand. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning." Tuesday Elias surprised him with tickets to a local theater production of a play about 2 men fighting for their love in the 1950s. Sitting in the dark theater, hands intertwined, Brody felt the story echo his own journey. Afterward, they walked the city streets talking about the future. Elias wanted to expand the union's diversity training nationwide. Brody admitted he had started sketching logo ideas for a possible graphic design side hustle. The dreams felt real now, shared and possible. Wednesday brought the first real misunderstanding. A union email went out praising Brody's courageous stand, and someone forwarded it with the comment "teacher's pet." Brody read it during lunch and felt old insecurities flood back. When Elias texted asking how his day was going, Brody replied curtly. Elias showed up at the warehouse unannounced, concern etched on his face. "Talk to me." In the empty break room, Brody confessed, "Sometimes I wonder if you're only with me because of the case." Elias took both his hands. "I fell for the man who called a stranger at midnight because he was brave enough to ask for help. The case is just the job. You're the reason I stay." The reassurance melted the doubt. They kissed right there, slow and healing. Thursday, the company announced company-wide policy changes based on the union agreement. Brody's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone knew. Marco approached him in the parking lot after shift, hands in pockets. "I was wrong. What I did, it wasn't right." Brody accepted the awkward apology, not because Marco deserved forgiveness, but because holding on to anger was exhausting. That night he told Elias, "I think I'm healing." Elias smiled. "We both are." Friday marked 1 month since the first phone call. They celebrated with a quiet dinner at home, candles on the table, soft music playing. Over dessert, Elias slid a small key across the table. "My place is yours whenever you want. No pressure." Brody took the key, tears in his eyes. "I'm ready to stop hiding." The weekend was spent moving a few boxes, turning Elias's loft into their shared space. Each shared drawer felt like another piece of armor against the world. As October leaves turned gold outside the windows, Brody realized the journey had changed him. The scared man who once ate lunch alone on crates now walked the warehouse floor with his head high. The love he had found with Elias wasn't just romance. It was partnership, advocacy, home. Yet he knew challenges remained. The national news carried stories of other workplaces resisting change. His parents still sent careful texts avoiding certain topics. But with Elias beside him, Brody felt equipped for whatever came next. The warehouse that had once been a battlefield had become a proving ground for the life he was building, one of courage, community, and a love strong enough to rewrite old stories. November arrived with colder winds and higher stakes. The union prepared for contract negotiations with Apex Logistics' corporate office. Elias spent long evenings at the kitchen table surrounded by spreadsheets while Brody sketched campaign posters on his laptop. Their shared life settled into a rhythm of support, Brody cooking dinner while Elias practiced his presentation, both pausing to steal kisses between tasks. Yet the bullying case had drawn attention beyond Chicago. A national labor magazine wanted to interview Brody. The thought terrified him. "What if my parents see it?" he asked one night. Elias set his pen down. "Then they see their son standing up for what's right. But only if you're ready." Brody thought about it for days and finally agreed. The interview went live mid-month, his face blurred but his story clear. The response was overwhelming. Emails from other gay workers across the country thanking him. A few hateful messages he deleted quickly. At the warehouse, the atmosphere had stabilized into cautious respect. New hires were told the story on their first day as a warning and an inspiration. Marco kept his distance, doing his job without incident. Yet tension simmered beneath the surface. Corporate headquarters sent a team to observe negotiations. The first meeting was tense. Elias presented data on how inclusive policies improved retention and productivity. The executives listened politely but pushed back on cost. Brody sat in the gallery as a union observer, heart pounding every time his name came up. The weekend after the first round of talks, Elias took Brody to a quiet cabin in Wisconsin. Snow dusted the pines as they hiked frozen trails. Around a crackling fireplace, Elias said, "Whatever happens with the contract, I'm proud of the man you've become." Brody leaned into him. "I couldn't have become him without you." Their weekend was filled with long talks about the future. Maybe adopting a dog, maybe starting a small design business together. The peace felt fragile but real. Back in Chicago, Monday brought crisis. An anonymous tip claimed corporate plan to close the Chicago warehouse and relocate to a non-union state. Panic rippled through the crew. Elias called an emergency meeting. "We fight this with everything we have." Brody volunteered to speak. Standing in front of 60 co-workers, he shared how the union had saved not just his job but his sense of self. "I was ready to disappear. You all showed me I belong here." The applause was thunderous. The energy shifted from fear to determination. The next 2 weeks were a blur of rallies, petitions, and late-night strategy sessions. Brody and Elias barely saw each other except in passing at the warehouse. One night, Brody found Elias asleep at the kitchen table, head on folded arms. He covered him with a blanket and whispered, "We're going to win this." The negotiations intensified. Corporate offered concessions but refused to guarantee the Chicago site. The union voted to authorize a strike if necessary. Brody stood with Elias at the podium as the vote passed unanimously. The strike deadline loomed. Media vans parked outside the gates. Brody gave his first on-camera interview, voice steady. "This isn't just about jobs. It's about dignity for every worker, regardless of who they love." The clip went viral. Messages poured in from across the country. Even Brody's father texted, "Saw you on the news. We're praying for you." It wasn't acceptance, but it was contact. The night before the potential strike, Brody and Elias sat on their balcony overlooking the city. "If we strike, I could lose everything," Brody said quietly. Elias took his hand. "You've already gained everything that matters. Me." A community that refuses to stay silent. They stayed up talking until dawn, making plans for every outcome. When the sun rose, they walked to the warehouse together, shoulders touching, ready for whatever the day would bring. The final negotiation session stretched into the evening. Corporate blinked first. They agreed to keep the Chicago site open, implement full diversity training, and guarantee union protections for all LGBTQ+ workers nationwide. The room erupted. Elias hugged Brody tightly in front of everyone. Cameras flashed. That night, they celebrated with the entire crew at a local bar. Laughter and toasts filled the air. Brody looked around at the faces that had once terrified him and felt only gratitude. Yet the victory carried a cost. Marco quit the next day, refusing to work under the new policies. A few others transferred. The warehouse felt lighter without them. Brody's role evolved. Management asked him to help design the new training materials, recognizing his graphic skills. Elias beamed with pride every time he saw Brody's posters around the building. December brought holiday lights and family visits. Elias's parents came for Thanksgiving. Brody's sister flew in for Christmas. His parents sent a card with a gift card and a short note. "We're trying. It was enough for now." On Christmas Eve, Brody and Elias stood under the tree they had decorated together. Elias dropped to one knee and opened a small box. Inside was a simple silver band. "Not marriage yet, but a promise. I want every future with you." Brody pulled him up into a kiss. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." The new year dawned bright. Brody enrolled in online design classes. Elias began training new union organizers. Their life together was busy, imperfect, and profoundly theirs. The warehouse that had once been a place of fear had become the foundation of their shared future. Yet Brody knew the fight continued beyond their walls. Other workers still faced the same battles. The story wasn't over. It was simply beginning a new chapter. Spring arrived with blooming cherry trees along Lake Michigan and a new chapter for Apex Logistics. The diversity training program Brody helped design became mandatory across all company sites. He traveled to other warehouses to present it, sharing his story with quiet confidence. Each time he spoke, he saw recognition in the eyes of young workers still hiding. Elias accompanied him when schedules allowed, their partnership a living example of what solidarity looked like. At home, their loft filled with plants and half-finished design projects. They adopted a rescue dog named Justice who greeted them at the door every evening. Life felt full in ways Brody had never imagined possible. Yet growth demanded more than celebration. One warm April evening, Brody received a call from his father. The conversation was halting but honest. "Your mother and I watched that video again. We don't understand everything, but we love you." Tears streamed down Brody's face as he thanked him. Elias held him afterward without words, simply present. The healing wasn't linear, but it was happening. At work, the union celebrated its first anniversary under the new contract. A small ceremony honored the workers who had stood together. When Elias stepped to the microphone, he thanked Brody publicly for showing everyone what courage looked like. Brody stood beside him, no longer the scared man who once hid in the shadows. The applause wrapped around them both like a promise kept. Summer brought new challenges. Corporate announced expansion plans that could dilute union strength if not handled carefully. Elias led the charge again, with Brody designing campaign materials that went viral on social media. Their teamwork became legendary within labor circles. Late nights turned into early mornings, but they never lost sight of each other. One particularly exhausting week, Elias surprised Brody with a weekend getaway to the same Wisconsin cabin. Under star-filled skies, they renewed their promise to face every battle together. As fall leaves returned, Brody reflected on the journey. The bullying that had once shattered him had forged something unbreakable: self-respect, community, and a love that refused to hide. He had grown from a closeted worker eating lunch alone to a man who stood tall for himself and others. Elias had been the catalyst, but Brody had done the work. Their story proved that support could transform pain into purpose. On the one-year anniversary of the first union call, Brody stood on the warehouse loading dock at sunset. Elias joined him, arms sliding around his waist. "Remember when you thought one phone call couldn't change everything?" Brody smiled. "I was wrong." They watched the city lights flicker on, the warehouse humming behind them like a living testament to resilience. The fight for dignity continued in countless workplaces across America. But here, in this place that had once been a battlefield, love and solidarity had won. Brody turned to Elias and kissed him softly. "Thank you for believing in me." Elias whispered back, "Thank you for letting me." As the story of Brody and Elias spread through union halls and quiet conversations, one truth remained clear. No one should have to choose between their identity and their livelihood. Yet the question lingered for every worker still facing similar shadows. True or false? Standing up for who you truly are will always be worth the risk, no matter the cost.